Somewhere in the jungle of Belize, beneath 40 years of excavation and 8 centuries of silence, there is a tomb that was never supposed to be found. Not because it was hidden by accident, because it was buried beneath another burial, sealed under stone, layered under the weight of a civilization that apparently wanted its own origin story kept out of reach. Archaeologists had been working on this site since 1985. They had pulled royal artifacts from the ground. They had mapped the architecture of one of the largest Maya cities ever built. They thought that they understood what Caracol was and where it had come from. They were wrong. When the tomb finally opened, it did not just contain the remains of a dead king. It contained a jade mask, 11 ceramic vessels, shells from a coastline hundreds of miles away, and burial practices that had no business being in a Maya city at all. And beneath all of it, sealed in bone and chemistry and ancient DNA still being read in laboratories right now, was evidence that the story of how Maya civilization was built, who built it, who they were connected to, and how far that network actually reached, had been incomplete the entire time. This is what was inside. Most people who know anything about the ancient Maya think first of Chichen Itza, or Tikal, or Palenque, cities that have been photographed and documented and turned into tourist destinations, cities whose names carry weight in the popular imagination. Caracol is not one of those cities. It sits in the remote Vaca Plateau of western Belize, swallowed by dense jungle, far from the major travel routes, and far from the mainstream of Maya archaeology as it developed through most of the 20th century. For a long time, it was treated as a secondary site. Interesting, yes. Important, perhaps, but not central. That assessment was wrong in almost every measurable way. Caracol was not a minor outpost. At its peak, it covered more than 177 square kilometers. It housed an estimated population of over 100,000 people, a number that would have made it one of the largest urban centers in the ancient Americas. It dominated the southern Yucatan Peninsula for more than a century, from 560 to 680 AD, a period during which it defeated its more famous rivals and stood as the unambiguous center of political power in the region. It was eventually abandoned around 900 AD, during the broader collapse that emptied Maya cities across the entire peninsula, leaving its plazas and pyramids to the jungle that has been reclaiming them ever since. Arlen and Diane Chase began excavating at Caracol in 1985. Over the following 4 decades, they pulled thousands of artifacts from the ground, mapped the city's extraordinary road network, and slowly reconstructed the political history of a civilization that the jungle had done its best to erase. 40 years of work. And then, beneath a burial they had already found 30 years earlier, the ground gave up something else entirely. The burial discovered in 1993 was already significant. It sat at the base of a royal family shrine, the kind of placement that signals deliberate ceremony, deliberate honor. Archaeologists cataloged it, studied it, and moved on. They had no particular reason to look beneath it. When they finally did, what they found was older, deeper, and more important than anything sitting above it. The tomb belonged to Teotihuacan, first ruler of Caracol, founder of the dynasty that would hold power in this city for the next 460 years. He had become king in 331 AD, and he had been lying directly beneath that other burial, sealed in stone, for nearly 17 centuries before anyone reached him. He was not what the mythology of ancient kings tends to suggest. There was no physical evidence of a towering conqueror, no skeleton built for war. The man in the tomb was old, advanced in age at the time of his death, his body showing the accumulated wear of a long life. He had no teeth remaining. He stood approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall. He was, in the most literal sense, a human being who had grown old and died. What surrounded him told a different story. A mosaic jade death mask, shattered into dozens of pieces by the weight of centuries, had once covered his face. 11 pottery vessels had been placed around him with deliberate care, carved bone tubes, jade jewelry, And spoondy shells, the distinctive spiny oyster harvested from the Pacific Ocean, found in a tomb in the middle of a jungle city hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline. Each of those objects was a choice. Nothing in a royal burial of this period was accidental. Someone had decided what this man should carry into death. And every item they chose was a message. The pottery is where most archaeologists would slow down. And for good reason. 11 vessels placed around a dead king is not unusual. Ceramic grave goods were standard practice across the Maya world, a way of equipping the deceased for whatever came next. What was unusual was what these particular vessels were showing. One depicted a Maya ruler holding a spear, not standing in ceremony, not receiving tribute, not performing a ritual, holding a weapon. The image of a ruler as a warrior, as someone whose authority was backed by force, is a specific political statement. It is not decoration. It is a declaration. Another vessel showed a deity receiving offerings. A third depicted Ek Chua, the Maya god of merchants and long-distance traders. That detail is easy to overlook and should not be. The god of traders does not appear in a royal tomb by accident. His presence is an announcement. This king was connected to trade networks that extended far beyond the jungle city where he was buried. 4 more vessels showed bound captives, men rendered in clay with their hands tied, their posture communicating defeat and subjugation. These were not generic images. They were records, visual documentation of a ruler whose power included the ability to take prisoners, to dominate rivals, to hold human beings as trophies of military and political superiority. And then there were the lids. 2 of the vessels were topped with mottled handles shaped into the heads of the Coati Mundi, a small mammal native to Central America whose Maya name was deliberately woven into the names of rulers who came after Teotihuacan for generations. This was not a coincidence. This was a founding document written in clay, a political and religious statement designed to outlast the man it was buried with, and it did. By 17 centuries and counting, Teotihuacan became king of Caracol in 331 AD. That sentence is easy to read. It should not be. To put it in perspective, 331 AD is before the fall of the Western Roman Empire. It is before the collapse of the classical Maya cities that most people picture when they think of this civilization. It is the early 4th century, a moment when the ancient world was still very much in motion, when the great powers of Mesoamerica were still consolidating, still expanding, still working out what they were going to become. And in the middle of all of that, in a jungle city in what is now Western Belize, a man took power and built something that would last. The dynasty Teotihuacan founded continued for more than 460 years. To put that number in the same kind of perspective, 460 years ago from today takes us back to the mid-16th century. It spans the entire history of European contact with the Americas and keeps going. As a political institution, as a continuous ruling lineage, it stands as one of the longest lasting in the ancient Americas. Not the Maya world, the entire Americas. This is what makes the tomb more than an archaeological curiosity. Teotihuacan is not simply a dead king. He is an origin point, the biological and political root of a system that dominated an entire region for nearly 5 centuries, that built one of the largest cities in the ancient world, that defeated more famous rivals and absorbed foreign cultures and somehow kept functioning long after many of its contemporaries had collapsed into silence. The question that the tomb raises is the one that the artifacts inside it begin to answer. A dynasty that endures for 460 years does not do so by accident. Something gave it an extraordinary foundation, and that something was not entirely local. Teotihuacan was not the only significant burial found at the base of that royal shrine. Within the same royal shrine complex, archaeologists had previously uncovered 2 additional burials during earlier field seasons, both dating to approximately 350 AD. One of them, recovered in 2010, stopped the excavation team in its tracks, not because of what it contained, though what it contained was remarkable. because of what had been done to the body. It had been cremated. Cremation was not a Maya burial practice. Not in this period, not in this region, not among the ruling classes of the southern Yucatan. The standard Maya tradition involved careful interment, the body placed with grave goods, sealed in a tomb, left intact. What the team found instead was a cremation burial, the remains processed in a way that was directly consistent with the funerary practices of high-status individuals from Teotihuacan, the great city of central Mexico that was, at this precise moment in history, one of the most powerful urban centers anywhere in the ancient world. The artifacts buried alongside the cremated remains confirmed what the burial practice suggested. 15 pristine green obsidian blades sourced from Pachuca in central Mexico, a prestige material closely linked to Teotihuacan's trade networks. Pottery vessels whose style aligned with central Mexican production rather than anything in the local Maya tradition. 6 atlatl points and a carved atlatl projectile tip, a weapon type characteristic of Teotihuacan warriors, but rarely seen in the Maya world. Someone at Caracol, someone important enough to be buried in the same royal shrine complex as the dynasty's founding king, had lived and died according to the customs of a civilization more than approximately 153 days' walk from the Belizean jungle. 153 days. On foot, through mountains and rainforest and river crossings, nearly half a year of travel separates these two worlds. And yet here was the evidence that someone had made that journey, absorbed that culture deeply enough to be buried inside it, and come home carrying something that would quietly begin to change everything. The excavation of the tomb is not over. In a meaningful sense, it has barely begun. The skeletal remains recovered from Teotihuacan's burial and from the cremation burial are currently undergoing 2 forms of analysis that did not exist when the Chases first broke ground at Caracol in 1985. Ancient DNA sequencing and isotope analysis. And what those 2 tools are capable of extracting from bones that have been in the ground for 17 centuries goes far beyond anything a trowel and a catalog number can tell you. Ancient DNA pulled from skeletal remains can identify the biological population a person belonged to, trace their ancestral lineage across generations, establish family relationships between individuals buried in different locations, and map migration patterns across centuries. It is, in the most literal sense, a record that the body keeps regardless of what anyone decides to write down or leave out. Isotope analysis works differently, but reaches just as far. The chemical signature of the food and water a person consumed during their childhood is permanently encoded in the mineral structure of their bones and teeth. Strontium isotope ratios vary by geography, with enough precision that researchers can identify, not guess, not estimate, but identify the region where a specific individual spent the first years of their life. If the cremated individual's isotope signature points to central Mexico, the envoy hypothesis moves from compelling inference to confirmed fact. A member of the Caracol royal family, buried according to Teotihuacan customs with artifacts linked to that city's trade networks, who grew up in central Mexico. That would not be a cultural curiosity. That would be evidence of deliberate, organized diplomatic exchange between 2 of the most powerful civilizations in the ancient Americas operating simultaneously in the 4th century AD. The jade mask is currently being reconstructed from dozens of fragments. Piece by piece, the face of the man who started all of this is coming back together. The science running alongside it is doing the same thing to the civilization he built. The standard narrative of Maya civilization has always emphasized insularity. A remarkable culture, yes. A sophisticated one, certainly. But largely self-contained, developing its mathematics and astronomy and architecture in relative isolation from the other great powers of the ancient world, connected to its neighbors by trade, but not fundamentally shaped by them. That narrative is increasingly difficult to sustain. What the tomb at Caracol suggests is that high-level contact between Maya cities and Teotihuacan was happening earlier than previously documented. Not in the later periods where some cultural exchange had already been acknowledged, but in the mid-4th century AD, within a generation of Teotihuacan founding his dynasty. The contact was not casual. It was not incidental merchants passing through. It appears to have been operating at the level of royal burials, diplomatic envoys, and deliberate cultural adoption by members of the ruling class itself. Though the researchers caution that peer review and ongoing DNA analysis will be needed to fully confirm what the evidence so far implies. The spondylus shells from the Pacific confirm a second axis of connection running simultaneously. Caracol was not simply linked northward to central Mexico. It was linked westward to coastal trade networks that stretched across an entirely different geography. The city sitting in the middle of the Belizean jungle was a node, not an endpoint. This changes the map, not just the map of Maya civilization, but the map of the ancient Americas in the 4th century AD. A world that archaeology has tended to study in isolated regional chapters was in fact a connected system, moving people and goods and ideas and burial practices across distances that should have made contact nearly impossible. Caracol was not an isolated jungle city that happened to build something impressive. It was a point of intersection in an ancient international network whose full dimensions we are only now beginning to trace. And the man buried at its foundation was not just a king, he was a connection, a living link between worlds that we assumed had never met. There is a man in a tomb in the Belizean jungle who became king in 331 AD and built something that lasted 460 years. He was buried with the face of a god made from jade, surrounded by vessels that recorded his power in clay, and layered beneath another burial as if the earth itself had decided to keep him a little longer. For 17 centuries, the jungle kept his secret. 40 years of careful excavation came within reach of it without finding it. And when it finally opened, it did not simply return a dead king to history. It returned an entire architecture of connection that we had convinced ourselves did not exist. The hieroglyphic records had named him. The oral traditions had preserved the shape of what he built. The artifacts had been waiting in the ground to confirm it. And now the DNA and the isotopes are reading the biological record that no one thought to bury with him, the one written into his bones without anyone's permission. The Maya did not build in isolation. They never had. The mystery was never about civilization. The mystery was the assumption that a people this sophisticated, this connected, this deliberately global in their reach, had somehow done it alone. They had not. The tomb always knew that. Now, finally, so do we.